Hello, I'm Mark, and this is In the Round, Double Coiling Trouble. The ability to quickly roll uniform coils in a variety of thicknesses is enormously useful when working in clay. You'll obviously need a lot of coils if you plan on building with them directly, but they're also important for running seams when slab building and when reassembling solid-built and hollowed sculptures. They can even be useful when working on the wheel. Rolling coils can be tricky as it requires sensitivity to subtle variations in the thickness and density of the material and minute adjustments in pressure based on those variations. But, as with most ceramic and sculpting skills, once you've gained sufficient knowledge and experience, you can roll a coil in almost any way you want, between your hands, using your fingers, one-handed, with small motions, or big. When you're first starting out, however, I'd recommend following these steps. First, make sure you have enough space. A coil is just a long cylinder, or at least that's what you want it to be, so it's important that you have enough space in front of you to roll it completely around its circumference. This is, in fact, the most important thing to remember when rolling a coil, and the most common error beginners make. If you only roll half the circumference, your pressure will not be even around the coil, and you will end up flattening it. And then, obviously, as the coil gets thinner, it will also get longer, so you'll need enough space to either side so that the ends can grow without curling around on themselves. Second, make sure your surface is clean. Be aware that clay can stick to non-porous surfaces, so you'll have to be careful about your moisture if you're working on plastic, metal, sealed wood, or the like. On porous surfaces, like unsealed wood, canvas, or plaster, you won't have to worry about sticking, but drying out can become a problem, as the surfaces will draw moisture from the clay. Ideally, work on a porous surface that is slightly damp. Third, prepare your clay. If you can wedge your clay until it's uniform and air-free. If you don't know how to wedge, see my video 4 wedgings and a funeral on various wedging techniques. You will want the clay to be relatively moist, though obviously not sticky. Not only are most techniques in clay easier to learn with moist clay, because it's easier to move, but coils can suffer from a number of problems when they get too dry. Fourth, make your base shape, a log of clay a couple of inches thick. There are several ways to make this shape. Just squeezing it out between your hands will work if you're careful not to fold it in on itself. Sometimes I like to borrow a slab throwing technique and stretch the clay by throwing it against the table at an angle. For more on this technique and on making slabs in general, see my video, A Game of Thrown Slabs. Regardless, make sure this base shape is uniform and free of wrinkles, cracks, air pockets, and other flaws. All off-armature building and throwing techniques in clay involve stretching out a base form into a thinner finished form. This means that problems in the base will grow in correspondence with the amount that you stretch it. Although any problem that arises can be fixed, it's far better to start with a good base and avoid them in the first place. Fifth, roll your coil. With a smooth arcing motion and a very light touch, use your palms to roll the clay back and forth. Remember to complete the circle, rolling the entire circumference of the coil. Don't press too hard and don't use your fingers. Until you've developed sufficient control over your pressure, pressing too hard will likely squash the coil, while using your fingers will tend to leave grooves in it. I'd recommend bending your fingers back, both to avoid using them and also to emphasize the arced trajectory of your rolling action. If your coil gets too long for your ability or for your workspace, break it up into smaller pieces. Try to be sensitive to subtle variations in the clay thickness, but don't yet worry about trying to correct them. Just focus on smooth, even rolling. The pressure you use to move the clay, in combination with its own weight, will be sufficient to thin it out. As you get comfortable with the motion, you can try stretching the coil by moving your hands away from each other as you roll it. This is only slightly more difficult and far more efficient than rolling alone. It will also allow you to more easily even out thick parts through selective stretching. Once you're comfortable stretching the coil, you can practice compressing it in by moving your hands together to fatten up thin parts. If your coil is a nice uniform cylinder, all of this will be easy. In fact, you should be able to roll the entire coil from one end without any difficulty. But if you're new to rolling coils, it's far more likely that something is going wrong. So let's consider the problems you might run into and how to correct them. The most common problem is flattening and unevenness in the coil, usually due to a combination of uneven pressure and incomplete coverage in rolling. The solution to this is to twist the coil up and continue rolling. Twisting in this way may create a spiral seam in the clay, a problem you sometimes run into independently if, for instance, you left finger grooves in the coil and then compressed them together. Adding a little bit of moisture and continuing to roll should bring everything back together. If you find the coil flattening out just at the ends, you're probably neglecting them. Focus more at the ends and try to taper them a little, or if the problem is particularly bad, you can just remove them. If the surface of the coil starts to dry out and crack, you just need to add a little moisture. Be cautious not to add too much, or the coil will get too slippery or sticky to roll effectively. Hollow ends are another problem you might run into if your clay dries out too much. If this happens, remove the hollowed parts, moisten the remainder, and continue rolling. Tapering the ends of the coil can help prevent this from happening. If you find collapsed sections in the coil, you may have trapped air inside the clay. Although it's possible to trap air while rolling a coil, it more commonly happens during clay prep or when making the base form. The best bet here is to just start over, being more careful with your wedging and initial forming. And that's it, how to roll a coil. With a little practice, you'll be rolling with ease.